Hello and welcome to PCM's Webinar Friday. We are thrilled to have you with us today for our webinar, Transform Business Computing with the Latest Technologies from Intel. Joining us today is Tony Zaragoza and Darren Tofton. We're going to get right into our presentation in just a few minutes, but first I have a few housekeeping items. Please enter your questions in the question box on the right-hand side and I'll relay those to our speaker at the end of the presentation. We do send out a survey at the end of the webinar. Please fill it out and let us know how we did, as well as topics you'd like to see covered on future webinars. You should see that survey in your inbox later today. Speaking of future webinars, please be sure to check out our weekly webinar schedule on our website at www.pcm.com/webinars/archive. We are recording this webinar. It will be available for playback in a few days. Recordings are posted to our webinars page along with our upcoming webinar schedule. There you can also find previous webinar recordings. We are giving away a $100 gift card and the winner will be chosen at random. And with that, we're going to get started with our presentation today, and I'm happy to hand it off to Tony.
All right, thank you, Jorge. Let me share my screen here.
No problem. I'll let you know when it's up. There you go, Tony, looking good.
We're good to go? Okay, yes. Perfect, thank you. Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And we all know everybody's time in this work environment is very precious, so thank you for joining us. I joined PCM last October and to come join the growing team here that's helping our growing partnership with Intel. There's a lot going on in the industry, and the partnership now is stronger than ever and really requires close collaboration to make sure that we help guide our customers through all the new technologies that are out there. And prior to that, I was actually with Intel for 31 years. I was there when Intel launched the 386 and Microsoft was just launching the very first version of Windows. And I can tell you that in my experience in this industry, I've never seen a more exciting time in the industry, and I've never seen a more compelling time to embrace new technologies to help transform the way we do business. It's very, very interesting times, and I think that's this presentation is kind of geared to kind of share with you some of the latest technologies from Intel so that we can help, kind of position your information and position you to transform your businesses to thrive in this environment. So the agenda today is, why refresh and why now? And there's some compelling reasons we believe in, and we'll talk a little bit about that because it's not just about, it used to be just about getting a faster CPU and adding more memory. There's a whole lot more that goes into the decision to purchasing or refreshing now. There's issues in terms of the way we work and the form factors that are required. There's issues in terms of security. There's issues in terms of manageability, and there's just a lot of different variants that you need to take into consideration. It's a complete platform. It's not just about speeds and feeds anymore. And so we're not going to take a deep dive in these technologies from Intel, but hopefully it's enough, as I said, to pique your curiosity and then have you engage with the PCM sales team to help do the deep dives on the areas that you need more information or want to have further discussion. So, why refresh? Why now? We want to talk about that. And really, if you look at the world that we work in today, it really is transforming fast. Everything is moving fast at a rapid pace, and industries are being disrupted, and threats are growing exponentially. And like I said, the way we work is moving, from offices to homes, to Starbucks, to hotel rooms, to wherever you are, you have to be connected. You have to be working from different devices, and it's a very, very dynamic environment. So the tools that we have and the way we do things needs to adapt to this. And the question is, are you keeping up? Are you modernizing your environment? And that's important because in today's environment, you need modern tools to address the modern challenges. It's a different world today than it was, even a few years back. And so that's kind of what we want to do, is kind of talk about some of these things. Now, why refresh? Why now? There's really kind of these three pillars that we're going to focus on a little bit. And there's more to the story than just these, but this kind of gives us some buckets to talk about. And really around productivity, which productivity has always been a reason to to consider moving to faster devices and more capable devices. But, you know, the workflows that we're using today really are more demanding. There's a ton of things, you know, the dependency on our applications, the dependency on and the different workloads that are being thrown at us. When you look at the, you know, the cloud environment and the endpoint environment and how the interactions and the collaborations from different, you know, with different people across the country, across the world, you know, there's a tremendous amount of new usage models that are driving the need for better productivity, better form factors, because as I said earlier, you know, employees are working remotely, and so the form factor does matter. You know, how comfortable are you working in a hotel room, at a Starbucks, out in the field with customers, wherever you may be. So I think that's something that really Intel has invested a lot to drive modern sort of form factors to adapt to the different workplaces. And productivity is just not about performance only, it's about having the right form factor to work wherever you may be. And the middle pillar around security, I think that's no surprise to any of us. There's this growing exponential threat to our data, both our personal data and our business data. The breaches and the amount of data that's being exposed is crazy. And it's not just, you know, the hacker working in the basement at home. You've got, you know, these nation states that are coming from different places. You've got competitors trying to steal information from each other. It's a you know, and you've got data. You know, we have to figure ways and modernize the ways we protect our data. It's not just about virus protection anymore. There's a tremendous amount of things that we need to consider. And one of the considerations too is that, you know, security throughout your whole infrastructure, from the data center all the way out to your endpoint devices. And so we need to talk about that, and how do you harden and protect your data and your infrastructure. And the third pillar here, you know, manageability has always been something, and we've always had tools to manage and you know, your devices and to monitor them and do all those things. But, you know, the big thing that's happening now is, you know, if we look out backwards, many of you may have refreshed and may have modern platforms, and that's good, but there's a majority of folks out there that have PCs that are 4 or 5 years old. And I think that the consideration there is that, you know, the total cost of ownership is really around maintenance of these devices. And, you know, there's been numbers thrown around, but, you know, there's the amount of hours to replace it, which here they're saying at least 42 hours a year repairing these old PCs. But there's also the fact that just in general, things break, things have to be fixed, and it's almost less expensive to move to a modern device than it is to continually try to repair something. And it's just something that needs to be considered. So let's talk about, you know, there's that environment, there's those threats, there's this new work challenges, there's all these things, and let's navigate through some of the things that Intel has done that they've added to the portfolio, and talk a little bit about those. So the total platform value from Intel, it's not just about the processor. It's really about what Intel has been working on is the whole ecosystem and many factors that come to, you know, help, you know, affect and improve and produce better results out of the platforms that we use. You know, these platforms today are designed not just for, you know, today's environment, but the design to last for what we've anticipated are the next few challenges over the horizon here. And yes, in a couple of years, we'd have to refresh again, because the pace of change and the pace of threats and the pace of needs and the workloads are changing so fast that a refresh cycle may be needed. But in today's environment, it's absolutely needed for a lot of folks that have an older generation of processors. The 8th gen vPro processor, which was recently, you know, introduced, really was purpose-built for today's environment. And then if you go to the left, again, I talked about form factor, but besides developing the processors, you know, working with the manufacturers on what sorts of form factors, what do you need in terms of battery life for the mobile devices? What do you need in terms of performance for these high-end, you know, high-end workstations? What do you need for, you know, detachable devices? So there's many factors that go into the breadth of processors and purpose building them for specific type devices and specific type usage models. So the form factors, Intel works hand in hand with the manufacturers to make sure that there's form, fit, and function there. And then there's another thing that's coming that I think everybody may have heard of, but I want to talk a little bit more about it later, about the amazing performance that people get from their platforms when they add Optane memory. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And Optane memory may be new to some of you, but I'll hopefully try to explain it to give you a base understanding of what it's about. And it is something that you're going to hear more and more about, because every day there's new platforms that are coming out that have an Optane system, and that's going to continue to be the case moving forward. So there's Intel solid state drives, and I'll talk a little bit about just the fact of what is Intel doing in the non-volatile memory space. And there's a lot that's going on. And way back when, Intel was a memory company, and then we transitioned in the early 80s to become really a microprocessor company. And then that's really been the bread and butter of Intel. Everybody knows them as a processing company and a leader in the area. But what's happening is the pendulum is swinging back again to where Intel is becoming a very, very major player in the memory space. They have been over the past few years for sure, but we're really doubling down and tripling down to make a significant impact there, because they've had some recent breakthroughs in memory technology, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So another thing in the bottom of this picture is Intel Unite, and it kind of fits here only in the sense that when we talk about modernizing, how you work and where you work, there's a place that we spend a lot of time and that hasn't really been updated for quite a while, and that's a conference room, a classroom, a conference room, maybe a little huddle room, maybe your office where you pull in 3 or 4 people to share a presentation. Intel Unite is something that I want to talk about, and how do you modernize that collaborative interface with the folks that you work with. And then a little bit to the right of that is Thunderbolt, and we've been through many, many different sorts of ways to attach peripherals and devices to our PCs, and Thunderbolt 3 is just it's an amazing single port that does it all and has amazing performance. And so as you think about modernizing to a new platform, Thunderbolt 3 could really add a tremendous amount of capabilities and simplification to the devices that you use. And we put Windows 10 here as well, because Windows 10, Windows 10 Pro in particular, and Microsoft Office 365 go hand in hand with these platforms. The best solution is to migrate to Windows 10 Pro and to put that on a brand new platform with 8th generation Core vPro processors. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And what's important here is that if you're on Windows 7, there's a big date coming up, which is in January of 2020, which is when Microsoft's going to stop supporting Windows 7. And that's pretty significant if you are anticipating updates and all the different expectations that you would have. And so manufacturers will stop, Intel will stop manufacturing the processors that were compatible with that, and you'll start to see manufacturers transition to new platforms and basically phasing out the world of Windows 7 and moving the folks to Windows 10. And it's an appropriate thing to do, because Windows 10, again, is designed for today's challenges, the modern challenges, the modern work loads, the modern threats, all of those things, they go hand in hand together. And we'll talk a little bit more about hardware-enhanced security and Intel Authenticate technology. And in that space, honestly, if you look at all the challenges we have, there's the productivity and the manageability, but security, I would think in many ways, and some of us feel like, well, I haven't been touched by a breach, and I haven't been hacked, and I haven't had my credentials stolen, and what have you. And when you talk to any security expert, they'll always say it's not a matter about if it's going to happen, it's a matter about when it's going to happen. And so the best thing to do is to get ahead of the curve and continue to stay ahead of the curve and trying to prevent being that victim. And it can be done, I believe, through diligence. And it's just something that I think security is now going to be woven into the fabric of everything that we do these days. And it's here to stay, because no matter what we fix, some other clever person will figure out a way to get around that, and will continuously be a battle, but we're going to continuously work to find these hardened ways to make sure that you're as protected as possible. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. So again, diving into the Intel vPro platform, vPro is Intel's processor family that is purpose-built for business, purpose-built for the things that you need. You can buy a consumer device and you can get fast processors and you can get the performance that you want out there. But you can't necessarily get the other three things on the slide, which are security, right? vPro is built with hardware-enhanced functions and different capabilities that really protect any device, whether it's a PC or a desktop, a notebook, or any other platform that's connected to your network. Having a vPro processor in there gives you that extra layer of protection and manageability. So manageability, which a lot of folks think of vPro and they think of, AMT or remote management and all of those things, which is, again, continues to be a pillar of the vPro value proposition. So security, manageability, and stability. Because this is purpose-built for business, the ISIPP, that's the Intel Stable Image Platform Program, means that, you can have know that you're going to have a platform that for the next 15 to 18 months that isn't going to change. So your images doesn't need to be constantly changed and redone. So there's stability in the vPro platform. There's manageability, security, and performance. So it's built for business, and you'll always have the highest performing capabilities out of our processors in this space. So let's talk just a little bit about the new 8th generation Intel vPro processors. And these are some of the capabilities as you compare them to 4-year-old systems. And we do that because there's a heck of a lot of 4-year-old systems out there. I mean, a lot of folks, a lot of us are, we update our PCs when they break. We update them when they're just so painfully slow. We can't, bear it anymore. So we'll go do it. So, and that's good. But the thing to consider beyond just waiting for it to break or beyond just waiting till it's too slow to bear is that, this architecture is modified to adapt to today's workload. So you're not upgrading just because it's broken. You're upgrading because you need to analyze and visualize data. You need, to have a longer battery life. You need, better security. You need better productivity. You need all these different features. So it's compelling to upgrade to really have the optimized work environment, productivity, performance that gets, the PC out of the way and lets you do the things you need to do in the real time that you need to do it to stay ahead of the curve. So these are just some of the numbers in terms of, performance gains over 4-year platforms, and we do believe it's significant in saving you time and saving you money, and really, making the experience and making, the staff that work at your company, their experience in utilizing things. You don't want them to have the frustration of slow computers. Yeah, you're saving a nickel, but you're frustrating your employees. You don't want to wait till it breaks, because now all of a sudden you got that lag time before you get to the next, system. You ship it back, get it fixed. However, whatever delays, you're losing productivity there as well. So really the message here is modernize, get to an architecture that's adapted for today's environment that gives you that level of performance so that it stays, it's not a distraction and it's not, an issue of frustration with your staff. And I want to talk a little bit about this. This is kind of a transitionary slide into security. And we do believe that, again, workforce transformation begins with security in the sense that, looking at the environment, 60% of work gets done after business hours. So yeah, people work in the office, but yeah, they're working 24/7 wherever they may be. 2/3 of the folks do business from home. 40%, would quit their job if they had poor technology. The frustration that they won't bear with it. If you look at the workforce that grew up with technology, the millennial workforce that's coming into this environment, they have an expectation. And so there's an expectation on an experience and in a form factor and being stay, as state of the art as possible to be competitive in order for them to do the jobs that they believe they were hired to do. 82% say technology influences the job they take, which again, if you look at some of the places out there that are willing to make the investment in technology, then employees feel that they're willing to make the investment in their career as well. So I think they kind of go hand in hand in today's environment. So, it's when and how we work that continues to change. And we talked a lot about that, and I know all of you have experienced that, but I think it's important to kind of reflect on it and sit back and recognize just how significant things have changed. And from a security standpoint, 95% of the breaches begin at the endpoint. People getting passwords stolen, people, it's something that we hear every day, right? Whether it's an email company or a security, Equifax or whoever, credentials are being stolen, and those credentials are really 95% of the beginning of how a company gets breached. 72% of employees are willing to share data externally, 50% use cloud apps, and they may use apps that are easy to use or they're used to because they're in, they're consumer apps, but they're not necessarily hardened for the corporate environment. So it's important just to recognize that as the diversity of the workforce, as people are used to using things in their personal lives and trying to bring them into their work environment, the increasing risks and the likelihood of data compromise is continually happening out there. So what do you do about that? How do you combat that? And so one of the features that Intel has built into our 7th and 8th generation processors is something called multi-factor authentication. And really, or it's authenticate is the technology, but what we believe very strongly, and many security experts agree, is that you can't just have a password be that gateway into your IT environment, because if that password gets stolen and that device gets stolen, there's ways that people are going to get into your system. I mean, people leave notebooks at airports, people leave or they leave them in taxis, or they leave their devices, and so how do you protect that penetration if something like that happens? And that's where multi-factor authentication comes, in the sense of not just having a password or a PIN code, but maybe facial recognition. Maybe it's a PIN code that gets randomly generated continuously. Maybe it's your fingerprint. There's something like Bluetooth proximity, to where the cell phone, my cell phone, when I walk away from my PC, it automatically locks my screen. And I can't get back onto the network unless I have more than just a password. It'll have to recognize my face. It'll have to, have to type in a keypad. And in some ways, it may sound like, well, that's burdensome to have multiple things, but it's not. If it's facial recognition, I don't have to remember a password. If it's my fingerprint, I don't have to remember a password. If it's my cell phone, I don't have to remember a password. So there's certain things that are added that it's not just writing down, numbers down on a piece of paper, that really historically have caused a lot of damage out there. So this is something that we're going to continue to talk about. It's something that we feel strongly and have shown that it's much tougher to lose those credentials. And I said earlier, when you look at the breaches, many, in fact, the majority of them have started at the endpoint. So this is all aimed at protecting your credentials at the endpoint. So no matter where your person is working, no matter how they're trying to get into the network, using this best practice is really going to save a lot. So I think it's worth having the conversations, and these are things that the new devices provide, and these are things that Windows 10 Pro also helps bring to the party as well. And the other thing about this is that it's hardened in the sense that it takes this protection down into the hardware level, as opposed to many of the traditional security practices are software driven. They reside in the software environment, and what Authenticate does is it brings these capabilities down into the hardware, where it's locked in a vault and much more it's not penetrable. So it really keeps, it raises the level of security to a deeper level. And I think that's something that, again, we're constantly looking at ways to architect the devices to make them as hard as possible, recognizing the level of threats that are out there. So I'm going to shift gears now and go back to the memory conversation. And here I want to talk about, where Intel is making some big bets and some big investing, and they're doing it because, they've had that eureka moment as they've been developing their platforms. And on the left-hand side, let's just say there's two sorts of data that I want to talk about. There's the warm data, which is typically on your PC. That's the data that's out on your hard drive, right? You go fetch it when you need it, but that's the mass of data that you have, and it's warm. And then there's the hot data, which is, what gets buffered into your DRAM. It's stuff that I need right away. It's stuff that I'm working on immediately, so I don't want to have to go to my hard drive to go fetch it all the time. So it's hot data, high performance, right in front of me, zero, delay as I'm working on that software. So on the left-hand side, there were spinning hard disks, and then we moved to solid-state drives, and that's where, if you want high performance, you're going to do a solid-state drive, and that's great. But there's always that waver in between. Well, I need a real high-density drive, but I really like the performance of an SSD, so I don't know if I want to, how dense can I afford to get on an SSD? And so one of the things that Intel has done, one of the breakthroughs, is what's called Intel's 3D NAND technology, where traditional NAND technology was done on a 2D plane, right? A piece of silicon was a two-dimensional, device where Intel would draw the circuits, and that would be your computer chip. Well, the breakthrough was this 3D capability, to where now you can build layers of devices on top of each other. So basically, imagine it's like taking the footprint of a skyscraper and then building floors up as high as you can go. Going to 32 layers, to 64 layers, to 128 layers, and that's where Moore's law is growing from a memory's perspective now. It's going up, not just in two dimensions. And so what's happening here is that's giving Intel the ability to put more and more data on a smaller and smaller footprint, and it's enabling them to make it at a much lower cost. So you're going to start to see an acceleration of non-volatile memory really becoming more price competitive and giving you the best of what it brings, right? Non-volatility, it gives you more reliability, consumes less power. So it really has, a lot of benefits. So you're going to see tremendous growth and a tremendous push on Intel there. And on the right-hand side, Intel Optane technology, for that high-performance space, I'm going to talk a little bit about a product that's out today, but this is just the tip of the iceberg on how Optane technology is going to influence, the way PCs are designed, the way servers are designed, for that matter. So we'll talk about that. And it's really, the Optane technology is playing in the space of where DRAM is today. So now imagine non-volatile memory now working side by side with DRAM. So what is Optane memory? So if you look over here on the left-hand side, even today, as of last year, 79% of desktops still used traditional spinning hard disk drives, and 36% of notebooks still used traditional spinning disk drives. And if you look at the SSD slide below, only less than 20% of desktops use SSDs, and 44% of notebooks. So the reason for this, while SSDs again are beautiful and wonderful in terms of performance and the other features that it brings, it's still a little cost prohibitive, and hard disk drives just are denser and lower cost. So what Optane does is introduce this Optane module, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But what it does is it gives you kind of the best of both worlds. What it really does is it gives you would plug in this module into a system that had a hard disk drive, and it would give you solid state drive performance. So just imagine, I can have a highly dense, cost-effective spinning disk drive, a terabyte, 2 terabyte, and I would use an Optane module to give me the level of performance of an SSD. So that's what the Optane module is all about, and you'll start to see a tremendous amount of systems out there with this. So, what is Optane memory? It takes advantage of the 3D cross-point memory technology that I talked about earlier, where they're building, in three-dimensional as opposed to just two-dimensional. It's leveraging that technology. The devices are put onto a standard M2 connector, and so you're able to plug this thing into either a 7th or 8th generation core processor-based system. It will not, you can't go back to a 6th generation platform and take advantage of this technology, unfortunately, because it is a PCIe interface. So the other thing besides the device, there's also this other value proposition, which is called Intel Rapid Storage Technology. And what it is, this is going into something that you're going to continue to see more and more, is how do we add kind of what I would call artificial intelligence into our devices to help them perform better. So what happens is, as you go to your hard disk drive and you pull out an application, it goes into the Optane memory module, right, and kind of performs as a cache side by side with your DRAM. And as you do that, the algorithm is constantly saying, well, whenever this person does this app, he usually goes for this data, or whenever he runs, this sort of thing at this time of the day, he's, it's looking at all the different factors to kind of anticipate what are you going to need. So as you start up one application, it may go fetch the last 4 or 5, spreadsheets that you did before, or Word documents or PowerPoint, so that you already get a fresh start and an acceleration of by it knowing and anticipating what you do. And one analogy somebody gave me, which made a lot of sense, was that if you look at those devices out there, like I think it's like the Alexa, where when you first get it, it has trouble understanding your language, how you speak, your habits. It doesn't really know you. There's a get to know period. But then the more you use it, the better it gets, until it becomes very familiar with your tones and your voice and things of that sort. And that's really a similar analogy to what this does too. It's learning your work load and processes and adapting and getting smarter and faster. So again, the typical configuration on the left, there's a hard disk drive and there's DRAM. The new platform that we're bringing to market through Dell and HP and Lenovo and all the OEMs is you add that Optane memory in the middle there, and now you have SSD performance by leveraging the cost effectiveness and density of traditional spinning hard disk drives. And again, people will say, well, why don't I just go to SSDs? I mean, prices are getting better, and they are. There's definitely a curve heading in that direction, but we just did a price analysis on a system that had a terabyte hard drive, 8 gigabyte of DRAM, and it was, let's say, at $1,000. And then we looked at that same exact configuration that was with a terabyte of SSD, and it was like about $400 more expensive. So when you do an apples-to-apples comparison, $400 is a lot. In a platform. So you're not really there yet. And what people will say, well, no, I'm using SSDs. Well, what density? Well, we had to go down to 256 in order to afford it. Well, you don't have to compromise that if you have an Optane platform. You can keep your terabyte disk, spinning disk, add the Optane, and now you got the performance. And one of the areas where this has really done quite well is in the gaming segment, right? Because you have a lot of gamers. These are do-it-yourself guys who are building systems. They try to save money as much as they can, but they also try to get the maximum performance that they can because they're competitive gamers. And that's where Optane has done quite well, where they have their terabyte and 2 terabyte hard disks that are very, they have all their files, all their games, all the things that they do. And then with Optane, they're able to really up their game in terms of the performance. So they don't have to go off and buy an SSD and lose the density. So this is one thing I just wanted to point out, which I think is pretty important too, because it's another unique thing that Optane brings to the party. Now on the left-hand side, you have a SysMark 2014 score, and on the 3 bars on the left, the kind of grayish bars, you see one configuration with 4 gig, one with 8 gig, and one with 16 gig of DRAM. So there's a nominal performance, right? 0.96 to 1 to 1.01 by going from 4 gig all the way to 16 gig of memory. But now, if you were to just take that 4 gig memory and add the 16 gigabyte Optane memory module, it goes up to 1.35. So by adding that, you got the lowest DRAM density. You add the Optane module, and this is probably about a $50, $60 module. And again, price varies depending on, how the OEMs integrate and the other features of the system, but consider about averaging today a $50 difference. But yet how much would it cost you to go to 8 gig of DRAM and 16 gig of DRAM, thinking you're going to get more performance, but yet really the smarter bet is to just add an Optane memory module or buy the system already. And then you go to 8 gig of DRAM, and even in the Optane environment, you don't get a tremendous gain by adding more DRAM. So the message here is that with Optane, you can really achieve higher level performances with a minimal investment in DRAM. And you get the benefits of overall system performance that the Optane brings. So on the right-hand side, similarly, it's the responsive score versus the overall score. And you see again, the 4 gig, the 8 gig, the 16 gig, nominal performance upgrade by just upgrading. And that's talking about the way we look at the things we do. Our normal gut response is let's go buy more DRAM to get more performance. But yet you're not necessarily getting it. However, when you add the Intel Optane, you do get the significant upgrade. And so that's pretty significant. And again, you can save cost on DRAM, but leverage the performance of Optane. So that's just something we wanted to share with you. So now I'm going to talk about something else. Again, a new way of looking at things is with our new 8th gen Intel Core processors, we are introducing a new brand. It's something called the Core i+ brand. So everybody knows i3, i5, i7. Now you're going to start to see in the market i7+, i5+, i9+. And basically what this signifies is that if you have an 8th gen core processor and that system has Optane technology memory in it, then that qualifies to be called a Core i+. So when you're out shopping or looking for PCs, you see a Core i7, okay, may or may not have Optane. But if you see one that has a Core i+, you know it has Optane. So there's that immediate recognition that you're maximizing the performance based on that combination of not just the performance of the processor, but that turbo boost of Optane memory. So keep an eye out for that. That's just starting to roll out, so this is kind of a heads up. And again, introducing the Core i+ brand, 8th gen, Intel Optane. And it could be either Optane as the little add-in module that I talked about, or it could be Intel Optane as an SSD, because there will be not just the little memory 16 and 32 gig memory M2 modules, there will be PCIe slotted cards that can then become your larger density SSD storage. So keep an eye for that. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit to Thunderbolt 3, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it other than really to point out that if you buy a new modern device and it has Thunderbolt 3, there's a tremendous amount of capabilities that you have where it's just one port that does it all. Whereas before we didn't have that. You needed all of these different sorts of HDMI and USB and serial ports and all the different connectors. This is really kind of unifying everything to one thing, and it's not compromising performance. In fact, it's giving you more performance than all of those could ever have done before. So just, as an example, if you look at, speeds here, you have up to 40 gigabytes, per second, up to 8x what USB 3 is capable of doing, and up to 4x more pixels than HDMI. So here's one port that blows away any USB connector, blows away any HDMI connector. And so this, again, another reason to upgrade to a modern platform, to leverage something that really bumps up your capabilities, unifies and simplifies, the requirements that you have today. So I bring this up because I don't think everybody takes advantage of this capability, but it's something that is definitely there, and we want to share with you. And it's a part of the compelling reason of what you get when you transition to a modern platform. So again, kind of to summarize on this section, it's really what we wanted to share is it's Intel and Microsoft, working hand in hand together. The Windows 10 Pro platform combined with Intel's 8th generation vPro core processors, and now adding Optane into the mix, is really changing the dynamics out there. And Dell and HP, Lenovo, and all the major manufacturers are all working hand in hand with Intel and Microsoft to pull all these things together. So, that's where we're headed, and you're going to hear these things and you're going to see these things. And, we're presenting this to you today to give you the heads up, to kind of paint the picture of how the multiple pieces are kind of moving in tangent, and then they get fulfilled through the platforms that are coming from the different manufacturers. So I just want to shift gears for a second to talk about collaboration, and I talked about it earlier, and it's not necessarily part of the PC architecture, but it's something that we think is really going to revolutionize the way we work today. And if you look at things like classrooms, which are really, there's a teacher in front of the room, and how are they, working with their students? And it used to be chalkboard, and then it was the whiteboard, and now you're moving to where they're using, PCs connected to a projector. But even that has its challenges. And so, and if you look at most conference rooms, the reality is, I would bet many times you've walked into a conference room, tried to hook up your PC, didn't have the right cable connector, had to find the dongle to make sure you could connect. Then you had to figure out, okay, which the switch, maybe there was a little smart box on top of or connected on the wall there, and you didn't know which one was the one to connect the projector to the cable that you had. And you just spend, the average time to start a meeting today has been about 10 minutes. I mean, literally, and I'm sure many of you will realize it, like, it does take us a lot of time to get things going, especially when it's somebody new into that conference room who isn't familiar with it. And when you talk about people moving around and collaborating into different places, you're probably presenting in a new place, or somebody's coming to you to present, and then they have that difficulty in connecting, their platform. And so, what Intel had done, and this is something that Intel did internally at Intel. They had they recognized how much productivity was lost, and they recognized that all of these cables, and when you migrate, the newer PCs didn't have a serial connection, so now you have to have all these different dongles, and HDMI was coming into the picture, and some worked with HDMI, some didn't. So there's so many different choices which added to the delay, that they decided to come with this platform, and we'll talk about it. And it's, the real goal here was too many cables, people, it's your turn to present, let me hand you the cable, oops, it's not long enough to reach you, could you move your chair over here so that you can plug into the thing? That was just unproductive. And so there were solutions that were developed, but they were pretty expensive, and they're pretty, pricey in terms of, and then not everybody knew how to use it, and it was difficult to set up, and it wasn't just your normal out-of-the-box PC sort of experience. So to address that, Intel came up with something called Intel Unite. And Intel uses it, and I'm pretty certain it's probably like 90% of the conference rooms at Intel, and Intel has over 100,000 employees spread out all over the world. And they have these devices because it improves the productivity. You walk into the room and on the screen, it just says, enter this 6-digit code. You enter that code and boom, you're presenting. So there's no cables to connect. There's no special things to do other than just to enter a 6-digit code. So it enhances productivity by far, and it supports all of the Windows platforms. It also supports all of the Mac platforms. It also supports Android devices. It also supports, you can present from your iPhone, you can present from your Android phone, you can present from a Chromebook. This works with pretty much every known device that you might bring into the workplace environment or into the, an education environment. So I think that's a significant thing, and all it really is, it's a PC, which, it has to be a vPro PC, ideally an 8th generation or 7th generation. It doesn't have to be, but it does have to be vPro, and the software, the Unite software, is free from Intel. So no licensing fee. You can buy the PC pre-configured from Dell or HP or Lenovo, and it'll have the Unite software already on it, and now you can immediately, put that into your conference room. You do have to integrate it into your network, and I'll tell you, why. But with a short setup, you're off and running. And, and it does work with, other conferencing plugins like Skype or, Zoom and what have you. And it's enterprise ready. And so the thing about this is you can be in a conference room and presenting wirelessly. So you walk into that room, that's cool. And you can hand off to anybody else. You hand off to this other person, they present. So there's no handing over cables. It's just, they just put in their code and they're off and presenting as well. So everybody in the room can collaborate instantly. But you can also have 4 people putting 4 displays up on the screen. So 4 people can say, well, here's my presentation. This person can say, look at my presentation. You could have them all 4 side by side doing a comparison, which you could not do with any other technology, plug-in HDMI or serial cable. And the other interesting thing is, if this box should sit on your network, and if you have somebody you're in Los Angeles and you have somebody in New York that can't attend the meeting, but they want to see what's going on, they can tie into that, they tap into that device because it's on the network, and they're able to see what's being projected. And if you want to hand off control and see what they're presenting, you can hand off control of them, and from New York, they can be presenting to you here, and you're all collaborating, on this one device. And again, we're talking about, a PC that probably costs you $1,000, $1,200, whatever the case may be. And once it's in, it's in. There's no licenses and what have you. And it's vPro, so you have, the manageability. So your IT guy can be anywhere and say, check on the device and update the firmware and do whatever needs to be done, which is cool. And from a security standpoint, this device sits in your network. So it's a device in your network, and it's as protected as any device that's in your network. So you have the same level of protection that you have for your overall network. So there's no vulnerability there. And, and again, just as a testimonial, Intel uses this across 90% of the conference rooms, and they have very sensitive proprietary IP that they share through these meetings and what have you. So they wouldn't give up the family jewels if it was at all vulnerable. So there's a very, high level security that's built into this, where they have the confidence to use this in their work environment. And again, as I said, HP, Lenovo, and Dell are the OEMs that all have these platforms available. So again, kind of to summarize, we talked about the total platform value. We talked about the fact that we really believe, it's the time to consider, bringing in a platform that's designed not only for today's challenges, but for what's coming next, for the next couple of years. We believe that Windows 10, is the solution for today's environment, and Windows 7, you got less than two years to really migrate. So the time is now to really if you're on Windows 7, to consider moving forward. There's the different form factors. Consider what's best for your workers. Optane, take a look at Optane. I think you'll find some really, really compelling opportunities there. Unite, we think, is going to really change the way you collaborate. Thunderbolt opens up a world of new peripherals, and Authenticate really gives you the multi-factor authentication that we really believe is really the way to go in order to protect endpoint, places where 95% of the breaches occur. So again, get ready to meet today's challenges. The devices that people use do matter. It doesn't just matter for what it does, but it matters for the comfort level that the people are using them, that they're not being frustrated, that they feel that you're investing in them to give the best and to give all that they can give. And, a more secure and productive workplace is here. These are all the technologies that we talked about. It's a portfolio of things that we've put into the devices today to make it a modern, secure environment. And we do believe that now is the time to refresh. And really, it's a Windows 10 Pro and 8th generation Core are the best solutions to meet the challenges of today. So with that, I want to thank you. And again, we can open it up to questions. But I appreciate your time, and the folks here at PCM are here to provide you with any additional information to help you navigate through the challenges and the opportunities that you have ahead of you. Jorge, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, Tony, thank you very much. We do have some time remaining for questions. Again, if you have questions that you have not yet shared, please go ahead and enter them in the question box now. All right, and the first question I have, guys, is can Intel Optane memory be used in the current 6th generation processors?
No, unfortunately, it is not backward compatible to those. It has to be a 7th gen or an 8th gen platform or platforms moving forward. But 6th generation, it will not work there. And it's just because of the M2 connector and the new technology that's enabled through that.
All right, thank you. And with the memory being used in expansion ports, will that create any latency or lag for the Optane memory?
So the expansion ports, I think the limitation for Optane typically is the bus that it sits on. So, it's on PCIe because SATA would slow it down. And if you go through USB, it's going to operate as fast as USB will go. But again, one of the other reasons to say move to Thunderbolt, because then that removes, that interface as a barrier. And quite frankly, even Thunderbolt, Optane could operate even faster than Thunderbolt. It's just, but that's what you got. So really, I think it's, you haven't hit the threshold of Optane performance. It really just depends on how you're connecting it.
All right. Thank you very much, Tony. It appears that was our final question. I'll leave the floor open for any final statements.
Well, for mine, again, I just want to reiterate that it's a new world and there's new challenges, and we've got to look differently through the lens of why should I buy a new PC? And it's not just, like I said, because I got to wait 3 years for it to write it off, or I got to wait for it to break to do it, and it's all good enough, and good enough sounds good, and I know that there's a campaign that Microsoft is working on, as well as we work with them on. It's called, can you afford not to, right? You think you can't afford to do it, but if you don't do it, what are you losing in terms of productivity and security and all the other features? So think about the cost of not doing anything, right? The cost of doing nothing almost outweighs the cost of moving forward. You'd be surprised. So thank you again to everybody that, from my perspective. Darren, I don't know if you want to add anything if you're still on. Okay.
I am. I'm just on mute. So, I just want everyone for coming. And, if anyone needs any demo of these products of Intel Unite or Optane, PCM, talk to your PCM rep or just contact Tony, and we can get these out to your organization. You can test this stuff out. But thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. So with that, many thanks to our speakers, Tony Zaragoza and Darren Tofton. And thank you all for joining us today. Please be sure to check out www.pcm.com/webinars for our on-demand recordings and for our upcoming webinar schedule. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you again for future webinars. Have a great day.